Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good evening. Mr. Speaker, I rise to make a contribution to the Budget 2016, which was presented on Friday, January 29th, by the Honorable Minister of Finance under the theme Stimulating Growth, Restoring Confidence. The good life beckons. But having listened to the debates over the past 3 days, the comments through the social media, as well as members of the public, we will have no doubt in concluding that the confidence that some members of the population placed in this government has eroded. And so, Honorable Minister Bulkan, you may need to add me to the list, the long list that you mentioned just now, of the persons who highlight this budget as being dim. And as this government is about to complete its 9 months in office, which is synonymous to the average time period of the birth of a child, I can say with confidence that the Guyanese population are disappointed and becoming impatient in what they have seen as a result of the birth of the coalition. I hear your cry of only being in government for a few months, but may I remind the honorable members that before becoming a tree, the seed grows through germination. Mr. Speaker, if a bad seed is germinated, then what it results in is what we are facing currently. And so, therefore, Mr. Speaker, allow me to add to some of the discussion on this budget. I move to the regions. Last year, I mentioned about the need for the regional chairmen, vice chairpersons, to be sworn in as justice of peace. This has been the norm, and it's in accordance with the Local Democratic Organ Act 12 of 1980. And may you allow me to quote, Mr. Speaker, the chairman and vice chairman, by virtue of their office, be justices of the peace for their region, but shall, before acting as such, take the oaths required by law to be taken by such justices unless they are, on the day on which they become entitled to, act as chairman or as vice chairman. And such justices and have taken the oaths required by law to be taken to act as such justices. Well, let me tell you the fresh approach. There have been a number of articles written on this same matter. To date, the Honorable Minister has not answered to the population or made any comment as to why our regional chairpersons and vice chairpersons have not been sworn in as JPs, hence preventing them from performing their roles as part of their civic duty within their region. Yet we speak of empowerment. Mr. Speaker, respect for the regions, especially those that are controlled by the PPPC, must first start at the cabinet level. We have observed a trend whereby ministers are going into the respective regions on governmental business and not formally informing the regional democratic councils. While in some cases, the regional chairpersons and vice chairpersons are notified through the local coalition political activists. This is I pass, Mr. Speaker. We can never get tired of reminding the government that they need to stop behaving like if they are in campaign mood and start acting as responsible government for all of the people. Honorable Minister of Communities, maybe you can inform the House of the protocol that is involved. We have even seen a trend, workshops to promote equality, which sounds well in theory. However, when you examine the invitations that are being done for these workshops, it is anything other than equality. And I leave it there. Mr. Speaker, in 2015, early into the government term, the REOs were given a hefty increase. The new REOs, that is. The Honorable Minister of Communities, while on this side of the House, whenever he heard the salaries of the regional chairpersons and regional vice chairpersons, he cried shame. The ball is now in your court. In fact, when I look at line item 6211 on the sustainable community management, the budgetary allocation has decreased to 99.9 million from an actual 106.6 million in 2015. You have had 2 budgets to date. We call for the granting of similar percentage increase for regional chairpersons and regional vice chairpersons. Regional executive officers. Mr. Speaker, by the end of next Friday, we in this House will be asked to approve the estimates for both the capital and the current estimates, both current and capital estimates for both the ministries and the regions. Therefore, it would be remiss of me to not make reference to the newly appointed regional executive officers. The REOs and accounting officers in their own right will be placed with the responsibility for implementing projects and programs totaling 32.5 billion for the 10 administrative regions. Mr. Speaker, as mentioned prior, speakers have been using the term fix it. The Honorable Minister of Communities, I therefore charge you, you need to address the number of areas and fix the problems with the REOs. And before I probably give you what are some of those issues, let me quote from your budget speech last year, 2015, because I heard you just now, you made mention giving an explanation as to why 30 billion went back to the consolidated fund that was returned from the 10 administrative regions and ministries. However, let me quote, in each of our 10 regions, capital projects had to be shelved as a result of this. In fact, the capital allocations in this budget are some 26% less than it was in 2014, or a sum of 749 million. What the Honorable Minister was saying in 2015 was that they had reduced the allocation for the capital budget for the regions, bearing in mind of the late start in 2015. So therefore, the excuse of having a late budget in 2015 does not hold water because there was an already reduced allocation. Mr. Speaker, I also heard the Honorable Minister mention as one of the excuses that part of the delay was in the setting up of the newly constructed regional tender boards. Yes, we recognize they had to have new regional tender boards because you had a new administration in place. But where do you place that blame? The responsibility for the approval of the regional tender board is at the National Procurement Tender Administration Board. And so I don't understand why it would take long to be approved. And the Honorable Minister, I was disappointed because I was looking out for an explanation by yourself as to why or as to what the ministry has in place to deal with the regional executive officers and to address the issues of not spending money and implementing their projects and programs in a timely manner. I didn't even hear any mention about the major issue of the shortage of drugs and medical supply. And in fact, I am thinking, Mr. Speaker, because we would have heard one explanation that over $600 million was returned to the consolidated fund as unspent. But when you examine, and this was provided by a permanent secretary, and when you examine the estimates of the regions on the line item drugs and medical supply, you will see that there's an expenditure mentioned. So I therefore would like to ask the Honourable Minister, which is really accurate? And my own explanation, and I'm subject to correction, there was a late cutting and holding of check just to reduce the balance on the IFMA system. But by the time the permanent secretary appeared before the Public Accounts Committee, by the time the permanent secretary appeared there, he didn't get the memo that the checks were cut. So we need to address those differences. Mr. Speaker, many of the regional executive officers still seem to don't understand their roles and functions within the region. We have regional executive officers who are carrying out the role of the regional chairpersons. We have them driving around and making decisions on behalf of the region. You'll go far, you have right in Region 6. There you also have regional executive officers who are stemming the region by taking long to make simple decisions. And when you look at the regional tender board functionalities, and we speak about transparency, I would like to help the process, Honourable Minister. The regional tender boards have been meeting in an ad hoc manner. And may I proffer a reason for that? One of the reasons that have been given was that when the regional tender boards reach in an ad hoc manner, there are going to be absenteeism at that tender board. So at very short notice, you are given that we are meeting today, and so the relevant persons who may have their eye out will not be able to attend. You need to fix that because there are statutory dates that are set for the meeting of the tender boards. Lack of minutes. The minutes are not being provided to the regional regional Democratic Council. Contracts are not being provided. You have to be begging for information. As simple as the allotment report for the IFMAS, you cannot get. The regional Democratic Council has to go through a long process before some of the regional executive officers provide it. And there was a policy in place, Mr. Speaker, that whenever you have contracts that are being awarded within the various communities, and I know the explanation now will be given, yes, it is online, and I commend the government for ensuring that is done. But how many persons at this point in time within the communities are able to access online? So when you have that signing of contract, it is important to ensure that the on-price bill of quantities is posted at the location of work, wherever the work is taking place, whether it's a school. It's a policy. Mr. Speaker, we have had allegations of contract splitting. And so I want to ask the Honourable Minister to address, and it is worrisome, in light of the limits of the regional administration being raised. And so I want to ask the responsible Minister of Finance in his discussion with MPTAB to ensure that the mechanisms are put in place to have the tight evaluators and constant changing of evaluators to ensure that we have a secure system. We have cases of REOs not attending regional democratic council meetings. You have one REO who has not to date attended any RDC meeting. Yes, it is. I can name. And you have, in many cases, the decisions of the RDCs are not being implemented by the REOs. And so while the Honorable Minister quite glowingly mentioned as one of his pillars decentralization, well, part of the decentralization is to ensure that the decisions that are made at the decentralized level is carried out. Progress reports. The regional chairpersons, vice chairpersons, the RDCs in general are crying out. Reports are simple reports that the RDCs are not being provided in a timely manner. And you have now projects for regions are being determined, the priority projects are being determined by the regional executive officer bypassing the ruling of the Regional Democratic Council. And there's a general trend, Mr. Speaker, and it's having a domino effect. We have seen a total lack of respect and insubordination to regional chairpersons and vice chairpersons by many of the regional executive officers. And I want to say, predict here, in another 3 years, if you think the situation is bad now, it will get worse. Because already you have limitation in the allocation of fuel, preventing the mobility of the political arm of the region. Let's go to land and water transport. Regional administration and finance. Last year, I made the observation that under regional administration and finance, the 2015 capital budget only allocated budgetary resources for Regions 4, may I say plural, motor vehicles, Region 7, singular vehicle, Region 10, motor vehicles, totaling 32.5 million. Do we recognize the 3 regions? In 2016, Mr. Speaker, the only region that is budgeted under the regional administration and finance is Region 4 again. Purchase of vehicles to the tune of 12 million. Mr. Speaker, it is under regional administration and finance that vehicles purchased or procured. It is where the political arm of the region gets their access to vehicles. And so I make the charge that for 2 consecutive years, Regions 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9 continue to suffer. I give you one example. Only one I need to give. The regional chairman of Region 1 quite frequently has to use his taxi at his own resources. There was even a shared vehicle that was used, but that vehicle has been down since October last year. Ministry of Communities. I want to provide a clarification. Since the Honorable Minister Edgell would have quite clearly provided information on the contracted employees. But let me just provide a little clarity before the Honorable Minister rebuts what the Honorable Minister Edgell would have provided. When you summate the allocation, the actual expenses on the Ministry of Local Government for the 3 programs in 2015, that is a total of 48.6 million. When you add the community's expenditure from September to December, that's 37.8. When you add the allocation of the committed expenses in 2015 for house on the Ministry of Housing, that's another 33.1. Hence, a total of 119.6 million of the actual expenses for 2015, representing 55 employees. In 2016, the total contracted employees allocation for an additional 7 employees is 148 million, hence an additional $28.47 more million. So the Honorable Minister, next week you will need to provide the information. Who are those 7 persons incurring a total of $28.47 more million? Other operating expenses. Mr. Speaker, there is a strange phenomenon in this line item. The honorable members on the government side, while in opposition, queried and asked detailed questions for any allocation that was made under the line item order. But let me put this into perspective. The actual expenses for 2015 totaled $407,000. Mr. Speaker, the budgetary allocation for 2016 under other operating expenses is a whopping $427 million. A small matter of 99.9% increase. Suddenly, other is nothing but other. Project development and assistance. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister was correct when he would have provided an explanation on the fiscal transfer, which takes into consideration the area size of the locality, the population, their actual rate of collection. And so what happens is that whenever you have the lump sum, the formula is applied, and that's how you get the allocation for each one of the local authority. Last year, unfortunately, the Honorable Minister would have admitted to this House that he did not implement the Fiscal Transfer Act, which was signed into law in 2014. In 2013, actually, which should have started in 2014. While in government, we were accused of depriving MDCs and municipalities of resources. In light of local government elections, and with the election of the 71 local authorities who will have new authorities, I say an increase of 42 million using the same team, using the same line message that was given by the Honorable Minister of Communities when he was over here, is woefully inadequate. Solid waste. We were informed of the introduction of a national solid waste strategy. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister does not have to reinvent any wheel. May I remind him that he has at his disposal a complete solid waste management bill, which is ripe for piloting, which also includes the setting up of the Solid Waste Management Authority, enforcement, and deals with enforcement and penalties, etc. There are complementing acts, such as the EPA Act, the Municipal and District Council Acts, etc., and the Public Health Ordinance Act. So without delay, and the Honorable Prime Minister would have been instrumental in the first draft of that act. Speaking of strategy, Honorable Minister, you also have at your disposal a regional solid waste program. While the budget caters for the construction of a landfill site at Bartica, and reference was made to the inventories of new landfill sites across the various regions, Mr. Speaker, the Environmental Protection Agency has a list of potential sites. In 2014, access roads were constructed to sites in regions 1, 2, 5, 6, and 7. And 9, the access roads commenced. One would have expected by now, therefore, resources would have been made available to those sites that we already know that are available in addition to Bartica, to develop further so that simultaneously, if you want, you can do an updating to see what additional sites. But we don't have to wait a whole year because there are a number of sites that have already been identified in addition to Bartica.
Honourable Member, you have 5 minutes more.
Sure.
Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to ask that the Honourable Member be able to have his full 35 minutes and the additional 5 minutes as required, within the 5 minutes as required.
Allow me, Mr. Speaker, to speak a little.
I thank the Honourable Member. Honourable Member, you will speak for a total of 35 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Region 1. Once again, and I see my friend at the back, I received disappointed messages of this representation of Region 1. His limited presentation, which focused on pensions in general, youths and training, and the one mention of the road construction from Port Kaituma to Baramita, very well. But the Honourable Member has to remember there are 3 sub-regions in Region 1. Honourable Minister Cummins spoke so glowingly, the coloured girl in the ring, of the completion of the construction of the new Port Kaituma Hospital. Not even for 1 second could you acknowledge the foresight of the PPPC government. In fact, this hospital should have been completed last year, the construction. There was even a disagreement, the hospital that you spoke so glowingly of, there was even a disagreement as to the location in Ornock. The Honourable Ganga Prasad last night provided the percentage performance of the region's capital. But allow me, Mr. Speaker, to provide a little further explanation on Region 1 overall capital performance. Region 1, and out of an allocation of 186 million, the actual expenditure was 119.19 million. 66.907 million was returned to the consolidated fund, or 36% of the allocation to that region. But let's dissect it further. Public Works, out of an allocation of 30.8 million, 7.4 million was only expended. 76% unspent. In that, Mr. Speaker, is the 20 million that is reappearing on the 2016 budget for the upgrading of the electricity supply for Wangna, Hosorora, and Sugar Hill. That 20 million was made, that allocation was made in 2015, and it's returning. Mr. Speaker, this House is owed an explanation as to why there wasn't even an award of the allocation for the electricity distribution to the tune of $20 million. Even if you look at health services, out of an allocation of 80 million, 53.2 million was expended, with 33.5% unspent. Of this, Mr. Speaker, buildings health, 9.5 million was expended only out of 18.1 million. What prevented the construction of buildings? That is an easy award that can be done within the regional tender board limit. Much needed space and rehabilitation across the region. Look at land, but don't look further. Land and water transport, out of an allocation of 24.5 million, $10.4 million was expended on the land and water transport for health in Region 1. This, Mr. Speaker, is just a simple procurement. There needs to be an explanation as to why the people of Region 1 would have suffered. Okay. Yeah, moving on, sure. Electricity generation. And I commend the Honorable Minister for providing the information that he just did. So I therefore ask you, Honorable Minister, to pay attention to the installation of the boards for the Port Kaituma, Mabruma, and Muruka Power and Light. You are ready? Well, I'm reminded to Madia. You have at your desk recommendation of sorry, my apologies. You have at your desk recommendation of names that have been provided that can sit on the board. But you can change it as you like, but you already have a start. These are members that are within the region, Honorable Member. I further ask, where are the resources for the increased generation for the Mabruma community? You campaign on the slogan 24/7 electricity for Mabruma.
Honourable Member, you have 5 minutes more.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You have had a chance in 2 budgets now, and there has been no increase to the usual 6 hours generating. Mr. Speaker, I can inform the Honourable Minister why the region performed poorly, and I'll tell him. You have a newly installed REO who, despite having there's an assigned regional executive officer house, took over the regional guest house annex, which is opposite to the regional guest house. Same thing in Region 2, and we now have a coup in Region 9. He removed 3 self-contained rooms which involved the destruction of bathrooms and complete bedrooms to accommodate himself when there's in a house already all the years for a regional executive officer. And in case they want to provide an excuse that it needed renovation, there was an allocation for renovation for that house in 2015. How can we, Mr. Speaker, get performance when the administrative head of the region is neither here nor there? Your REO has been out of the region more than he has been in. Always attending meeting and I don't know what else. To compound it, Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Regional Executive Officer was sent on 6 months continuous leave. So now you have a case in December, when it was crunch time, when you needed to ensure that your resources are allocated and expended. You have cases when the REO is out, nothing happened. Respect for village councils' decisions. I bring to this Honorable House another disturbing observation. A case of a certain minister of the government using their authority.
Remember, you have 3 minutes remaining.
And thank you. And overriding a village council decision. If in a simple case as to the determination of the location of a Benab, and I speak here of Kwebana, located in the Muruka sub-region, I can only imagine the magnifying effect that, as the Honorable Minister, Honorable Siraj mentioned, the dominating effect of a creeping dictatorship stepping in. And may I also inform the Honorable Minister of Public Infrastructure. While I know you're waiting on the boat that the PPPC government negotiated for the Northwest region, I know you have a boat that runs there now. Honorable Minister, you need to address, it is only a selected few they are accessing that boat. And the selected few happens to be pro-government business persons. And I could provide that information for you. So I ask that you pay some attention there. Hinterland Sustainable House Program. I thank the Honorable Minister, new Minister of Housing. And it's amazing, Mr. Speaker.
You have 1 minute more to wrap up.
Thank you. We have a new Minister of Housing who seems to be fixed. Because one day into the new term, has all the solutions for housing. Honorable Minister Scott, I don't know what happened the day before. And so you have, I commend the projects for Region 1 and 9, the hinterland projects. I commend you to ensure that the IDB funded project, which was negotiated under the PPPC government, to ensure that it's completed and implemented. And so, Mr. Speaker, I can go on, but I want to close by saying that this budget, when you examine the programs, the policies that are in place, it is not only about having expenditures that are done at a governmental level, it is also what the benefit for the masses out there. And that is why I conclude like the others by saying it is a budget for a selected few. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.